That was not a movie we just viewed. That was trauma. That was emotional trauma. We need a support group for everyone that's seen that movie. But that support group's gonna have to go on hold because today in the show, I'm going to be reviewing Avengers Infinity War. So if you don't know, I am signed to the Disney Digital Network, and last week they sent me an email basically saying, hey Faust, wanna see Avengers Infinity War a few days before the public? And I was like, hey Disney, why are you asking me? Just send me the ticket. This review is going to be very spoiler-free. We're not really going to get into story elements. I will get into a few things that I did appreciate about the story, but we won't be getting into fine details of the story itself, such as character motivations and things that actually happen. I do want to talk about one or two of the characters that were portrayed a lot better in this movie than they've been portrayed in the past. Then finally, I do want to talk about how I felt since I've seen this movie, and I will also talk about what I knew going into this movie. But before we get into all of that, let's quickly talk about the source material, because the source material is actually 3 stories: Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, and Infinity Crusade. So in the comics, Thanos is given the task by Death herself to kill half of all living things in the universe, as there are currently more living things in the universe than those who have died.
Thanos collects the 6 Infinity Gems, and it's actually the Silver Surfer through a series of events that warns Earth about Thanos. Thanos would then erase half of all living things in the universe, create a shrine for Death because he totally wants to bone Death. But then the cosmic entities and Earth's heroes, all under the leadership of Adam Warlock, would team up and attack Thanos.
Nebula would actually end up getting her hands on the gauntlet, she would have to be defeated, then by the end of the story, Warlock has the gauntlet. Following this, Warlock would remove his good and evil sides from himself to create the Magus, his evil side, and the Goddess, his good side. The Magus would go on to take the gauntlet for himself. Earth's heroes and Thanos would team up to defeat the Magus and trap his soul in the Soul Gem, but this puts Warlock in a coma. It's also revealed that Thanos has been made the guardian of the gauntlet, but that's a whole other thing we're not going to get into. When it looks like everything's been fixed, turns out the Goddess has stolen several of the cosmic cubes, would collect a total of 30 of them, and would create the cosmic egg. This egg is able to grant any wish, and she also creates a planet called Paradise Omega. Then she kidnaps any hero that was religious, used magic, or had a near-death experience, and brainwashes them into protecting her while she figures out how to remove all evil from the universe. As remaining heroes and Thanos begin to fight the Goddess finally decides for as long as there's life, there will be evil, so she tries to use her egg to kill all life. It turns out this is all an illusion, and this breaks everyone's brainwash, and she would also be trapped in the Soul Gem.
So as for how much of this is in the movie, a bit of Infinity Gauntlet, but 10%, and then there's none of Infinity War or Infinity Crusade. In fact, we can just pretend those don't even exist for now. I don't even know why this movie was called Infinity War. It should have been called Infinity Gauntlet, but I understand that War sounds a lot cooler than Gauntlet, let's be honest. Going into this movie, you do not need to have seen all 19 Marvel movies. I will say you should watch the Iron Man movies and the Captain America movies and the Avengers movies for sure. In addition to those, I would also recommend Thor Ragnarok, Spider-Man Homecoming, Doctor Strange, both Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I would also say having seen Black Panther would help, but it's not mandatory. That is a lot to watch, and I will be honest, before this movie came out, I was like, I'm gonna rewatch every single Marvel movie and TV show to prepare myself. Don't do that. Don't do it to yourself. I got halfway through the first Iron Man movie. The thing is, I was 10 when that movie came out, and so I remember it through rose-colored glasses, and that's what I'm gonna continue to do. It wasn't as good as I remember. It's not a bad movie, but it wasn't as good as I remember it. We're in a post-Avengers 1 world now, I'll put it like that. So keep in mind, I went into this movie totally blank. I don't watch trailers, I didn't look at any of the posters. A lot of people are really confused when I say I don't watch trailers, but the thing is, this is the 19th Marvel movie. I know what I'm getting into at this point. I don't need to see a version of the movie that's all spliced up and has sound bites taken out of context with dramatic music that's not even in the movie, all in the hope that I'll nut over a logo. So yeah, I didn't watch any trailers, and I also didn't reread Infinity Gauntlet, Crusade, or War because I wanted to go in completely fresh. Onto the movie itself, I loved it. I loved it. It was amazing. One thing I feel that really helped this movie that is not in this movie is an awkward romance storyline. Hero movies, more often than not, have a really awkward romance storyline that's just shoehorned in there. That is not in this one, thank God. There are 2 romance storylines, but they are ones that have been previously addressed. So you have Vision and Wanda, and then you also have Tony and Pepper. Speaking of Wanda, this is the first movie where they got her right. So in Avengers Age of Ultron, she was turned into this really crappy knockoff Jean Grey. That's the only way I can describe it. She was a really bad version of Jean Grey, and I hated them for that. And then in Civil War, she had no screen presence whatsoever. She didn't have much screen time, to be fair, but she was completely forgettable. I forgot she was in that movie. They also have never gotten her powers right. They always give her telekinesis instead of reality manipulation, but this time she has motivation, she has a reason to be there, she has so much screen presence, it's so much like the comic character, And her powers are still telekinesis, but they're in like the reality manipulation vein of telekinesis, which is a lot more like her powers in the comics. It's not perfect, but it's in the right direction. Another major character highlight for me is Mantis. Mantis just brought so much light to this otherwise serious movie. I'm actually not a huge fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I feel like the comedy isn't really written in tandem with the storyline. They need to like fix that. They got it better in the second movie rather than the first one, but it still needs work. It's still a little bit like rough around the edges. Mantis like stole every single scene that she was in, and I loved it. It was just fantastic. I think what helped the Guardian scenes overall is that the comedy made sense for the scenes this time, and these characters did bring light to this otherwise very serious movie. And this movie is not a comedy, but these scenes definitely helped the pacing a lot. Finally, I will say the structure of this movie is more of a beginning and a middle. There is no conclusion to any of the storylines. In fact, there aren't really any B plots. You could argue that the side plots are more like A- plots and A+ plots. They're not really B plots, and they don't really conclude either. I understand that next year we're gonna have the follow-up movie and that will conclude everything, but I would have liked to have seen a few things conclude in this movie, because going to the cinema is an experience and you want that satisfaction of seeing at least one storyline conclude. This being said, I'm not saying I wasn't satisfied with this movie overall. I was very satisfied with my experience, because this movie is not just an emotional roller coaster. This is an emotional train ride to the emotional airport, where you get on the emotional airplane and your emotional airplane crashes, so you get on the emotional boat and this emotional boat takes you to the emotional country, and there you build an emotional house and there you sit in your emotional emotions. I get why the storyline was done how it was done, because we are going to get a follow-up one, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I would have refined it a little bit, just to be to my tastes. You guys might like it like this, but for my tastes, I would have changed it a little bit. So it's been a few days, and I don't know if it's the movie itself, if the fact that all my friends are finally getting to see the movie, or if it's the fact that I had an audition for an action movie this week, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about this movie at all. I did see it with a few friends that are also at the screening, and I know I'm the only one out of that entire group that does read comics to the sheer volume that I do, and all of them were like crying bucket loads, and I felt a lot in this movie, but I didn't cry. I'm a huge crier in movies. I cry at everything. So I think maybe if you read a lot of comics, you might be a little bit desensitized to what goes on in this movie, because you know, like, okay, it's not the end of the story. You can't cry till the end of the story because it could be fixed. You know, comic readers, we're used to that long break, you know, that monthly break. So a year is kind of like, oh, this is a long month. That's all this is. One thing I did hear from people that ruined the movie is apparently people's contracts, like actors' contracts, are public knowledge. There's also apparently something going on between Marvel and Sony. I can't confirm any of this because I don't know about it. I didn't look it up because I don't want it ruining the follow-up movie for me. Because if you know which actors' contracts are coming to an end, then you know who's not going to come back after that following movie, and that sort of ruins the events of the following movie. In my point of view, I do wish Marvel would have seen this coming and would have been like, oh, we need to fix this, let's adjust people's contracts accordingly so it doesn't ruin the movie experience. But I understand that would have been very expensive to do, but it might have been worth it. Again, if you're like me and you don't know who these contracts apply to, go in without knowing this news, because honestly, it adds to the movie experience from what I saw. So overall, is this the best Marvel movie ever? Well, it's definitely up there. Like, for me, it's probably like Doctor Strange at number 1, the first Avengers movie at number 2, Captain America Winter Soldier number 3, and like this at number 4, followed by Spider-Man Homecoming. That's my top 5 Marvel movies. I like that this movie has such a strong focus on characterization, from interactions to motivation to just how the characters speak to one another. Everything about the characters themselves came before the fighting, and even in the fights, it focused on motivations. I think if you're this far into this video, you can't really go in too fresh anymore, but definitely go in as blank as possible, because it will help this experience so much. And if you must have a superhero fix before you go in to watch this movie, watch Spider-Man Homecoming, because you're going to need something lighthearted.
It's super effective!
Okay guys, that is it for today. So what do you think of this movie if you've seen it? And if you haven't seen it yet, are you excited to see it? Please leave in the comments down below. Once you get to thumbs up, subscribe, hit the notification button so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support the show, don't forget to check out my Patreon, or I have a PayPal donation link that just helps me make extra videos. But for now, my name is Faust. This has been Exploring Comics, and it is super effective.